Earth Materialises, Cyberpunk's construction of the Planetary. So cyberpunk is the literature of a digitally networked, uneven Earth. As the prose of the sprawl and urbanism's sprawling prose, cyberpunk streamlines city flows, neurological pathways, and digital frameworks into a glitching convergence. On this discontiguous aesthetic, Sabine Hauser has observed that cyberpunk celebrates the fragment, going on to use the patchwork urban landscape as a predominant example. Fractured at the level of the street, these fragments nonetheless cohere on planetary scales. Indeed, as Tom Moyland has stated, the genre is typified by its depiction of the triumph of planetary capital, where economic flows and planetary scales are unified through the operations of satellite technology. Exclusive focus on the horizontals of urban fragmentation thus often obscured the cohesive verticalities of telecommunication infrastructures, looming above and mediating the sprawl below. Undergirding cyberpunk streaming urban consciousness, then, is its orbital awareness. Moreover, as we're going to see, the interplay between orbital space and planetary visualization is a key locus for, indeed very literal, world building in cyberpunk. As such, the question arises, how does cyberpunk imagine, remediate, and re-envisage the Earth? In order to answer this question, the following is going to sketch out how planetary scale views engender, it turns, new modes of embodiment, new forms of control, and even unanticipated forms of emergence. In so doing, my aim is to begin to think through what it is that cyberpunk's orbital awareness is about, what it's composed of, and what we can learn from it. So, 1. True names and embodiment. Pivotal to Werner Vinge's cyberpunk text, True Names, are views of Earth afforded by consciousness-carrying and planetary-spanning satellite constellations. So whilst inhabiting what he calls the higher reality of digital infrastructures in orbit, the main protagonist, Mr. Slippery, quote, looked around him using all his millions of perceptors. The Earth floated serene. Viewed in the ultraviolet, he followed its hydrogen aura out many thousands of kilometers, oscillating in the solar wind. Across the oceans of the world, he could feel the warmth of the currents, see just how fast they were moving. Perceiving solar winds whilst feeling ocean currents interlaces the experience of inhuman realms from the outer space environment with the human sensorium. So it's tempting then here to start to read this mode of planetary perception as another of cyberpunk's classic moments of disembodied and neo-Cartesian mind-body splits. However, with the text's emphasis on the sensualities of the orbital realm and the planetary perception it affords, we could instead start to read this text, this passage here, as an expansion of modes of embodiment rather than a departure from it. Hence, access to orbital levels of earthly observation tie together flows from the hydrosphere and the magnetosphere, so from the oceans and the solar winds. They're tied together through the resonances of Mr. Slippery's extended embodiments. Orbital views of the Earth as a site of hypersensation and alterity thus not only spawn new forms of individuation and embodiment, but also result in a transplanetary ecology of both sensation and datification. Number 2, snow crash and control. So cyber and cosmic space also collide in Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, where navigations of Earth simulations are a key site of world building and plotting. In the metaverse, which is Stephenson's virtual reality, hacker hero protagonist, with the help of an AI, witnesses as, quote, Earth materializes rotating majestically in front of his face. Hiro reaches out and grabs it. He twists it around, he tells it to get rid of the clouds, and it does, giving him a crystalline view of the mountains and the seashore. And later in the novel, you also have Hiro talking about how the computing power to render smoke coming out of someone's mouth is the same as the amount of power needed to model the entire weather systems of the planet. So virtuality is thus portrayed as algorithmically flattening vastly different magnitudes into equivalents, circulating scales outside the human sensorium as mundane and technologically tameable. Planetary simulations within Snow Crash demonstrate how Earth systems increasingly fall under the purview of computational modes of manipulation and prediction. As such, the Earth becomes an object of postmodern play, characterized by its vertical density. So unlike True Names, where Planetary views trouble and partially reconfigure the subject, here Earth visualizations further consolidate ideologies of human mastery. Number 3, Cowboy Bebop and Emergence. But satellite infrastructures do not only enable orbitalized human cognition or embodiments, nor do they only render real-time overviews of a miniaturized digital Earth. Indeed, gazing upon and gathering data from the Earth often becomes a site of emergence for disobedient AI. In Cowboy Bebop's 9th episode, Jamming with Edward, a lonely sentient satellite, who's been given the nickname MPU, looks down and yearns for ancient earthworks which have long been effaced. Turning their longing into an art, the AI coordinates a constellation of orbital lasers to carve spirals and sculpt animal forms into the land. It's a restoration which becomes the cause of great devastation for the Earthlings below. The transformation of surveillance technology into the site of AI emergence and increasing autonomy demonstrates how orbitally based observations of Earth are also a catalyst for non-human cascades of perception and consciousness within the cyberpunk genre. So here, orbital surveillance and espionage becomes recodified as a crucible of non-human contemplation and creativity. And there's a pleasurable irony here, right, in the fact that disobedient AI emerges agents rather than mere mediators from infrastructures which were designed to maintain control over Earth systems. So rather than passive observations, MPU's sculptural restoration of ancient earthworks are an act of creativity which intervenes within and begins to reshape or reimagine the Earth itself. So while views of Earth in Snow Crash are perfectly embroidered within regimes of digital manipulation and control, for Cowboy Bebop, those same views instead instigate new forms of disobedient consciousness. In Cowboy Bebop, then, it is the AI that is increasingly the subject that spins and plays with the globe, rather than merely the means through which the world is spun. Conclusion. So from consciousness and expanding inhabitations to the increasing imbrication of Earth within digital modes of governance and through to the rebellions of disobedient AI, orbital views of Earth are a densely populated spatiality in cyberpunk with a number of different valences. This brief overview has excavated how views and simulations of Earth not only maintain hegemonic imaginaries delineating what comprises world, but also illustrate how the orbital can intervene within Earth systems. So the on-the-ground actuality of the streets are more than captured, surveilled, and facilitated by planetary spanning satellite infrastructures. Instead, orbital technologies enable forms of visualization and simulation, which remake the Earth in various ways. So, abridging Cyberpunk's notoriously fragmentary codes, then, the interplay between the orbital and the planetary renders Earth as an interface through which both radical and reactionary understandings of technology can compete.